Right, so amid the dire quarterly crime stats announced last Friday, which show about a 10% spike in murders and rape between October and December last year, some progress has been made in processing DNA tests. Now, these kits are often used to link a suspect to a rape or a murderer, even to a crime scene. That backlog, we understand, is now almost cleared. Police Minister Backlog confirming that the backlog, which at one point stood at around 240,000, is apparently now at 1,600. He also announced that the DNA Act will come into effect in March this year. Let's unpack this now with Dr. Vanessa Lynch, Director at DNA for Africa. Thank you so much for joining us. So it was nearly at 250,000, and it's now down to less than 2,000 DNA tests. How did they do this?
Hi, Sally. Remember that they ring-fenced that amount in 2021. So we mustn't forget that the total backlog is probably closer to about 60,000 samples, but they have reduced the initial ring-fenced figure quite significantly. We also mustn't forget that some of those cases haven't necessarily been analysed. A lot of them might have been closed due to issues with the samples, or it's been kicked out of court. But progress has been made, and I think we have to give credit where credit is due.
Okay, so to be clear, there was an amount that was ring-fenced, prioritised. That amount is down to less than 2,000, but there's still another 60,000 that they've still got to work through. But clearly, as you say, they've made progress. How did they do that? And is it something that's going to mean we're not going to see such backlogs like this ever again?
Well, I think every administration in the world suffers from a degree of backlog. So, you know, we can't aim for something that doesn't really exist anywhere else. The reason they got into the situation in the first place was largely due to a funding crisis. They had funding withdrawn, the Forensic Science Laboratory. A number of the contracts weren't able to be reinstated. So now that funding was given, they were able to reinstate those contracts. That laboratory was able to function. And that's why they really prioritized getting through the backlog and ensuring going forward that the situation doesn't recur. And we've seen this through the numbers that have been drastically reduced. And actually, a contact at the National Prosecuting Authority has also confirmed, because it's good to get a check and a balance, that in fact they are seeing progression and are seeing more cases coming through and more results being given to them to process to court. And that's great news. That's what we want to see.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, this is the thing, is that once we get those results, that surely then is going to open the way for more convictions.
100%. And not only convictions, but that's actually how they really are able to identify serial offenders. What we find, because we have a national DNA database in South Africa, is once they've loaded their profile onto the database, it often links that particular individual to not only the case at hand, but to several other cases that were otherwise unsolved. So there's a duality in terms of the importance and significance of processing DNA, which are sitting in a backlog. And that's why the authorities, at the NPA really need these results, because they can obviously get larger sentences if you are now dealing with a serial offender as opposed to just a once-off offender.
Talk to me about what we're talking about when we say DNA tests. I mean, are we talking everything from blood samples from murder scenes to semen samples for rape? What exactly are we talking about?
It's a great question, because they have two lanes. They have a reference lane, which is simple cheek swabs, which are taken from arrestees, and now from the 3rd of March, because it's been reinstated, from convicted offenders. These are very simple samples, and they don't take a lot of time, and they don't really contribute to the backlog. The difficult samples are the complex samples, which are crime scene samples. And because of the rape crisis that we have in South Africa, these are quite complex. There's often mixtures involved, and those go through the crime scene lane, which take a lot longer, and they require a lot more processes in order for them to get a good profile that can be loaded onto the database. So those are the two different types. And yes, biological samples, basically every single cell other than your red blood cells in your entire body contain DNA. So if they're able to get a biological sample, whether it's saliva, hair, blood, semen, from a crime scene sample or from a victim of assault, they will be able to hopefully get a DNA sample from that, proving that the person was at the crime scene. But obviously our justice system needs to ensure that they prove that that person perpetrated that crime. So, but it is very good evidence, indeed.
I mean, it really is so good to hear this news. It's really, really encouraging. You also explained the important implications, because we do have so many serial rapists in this country, that this could stop a rapist and identify a serial rapist much quicker. But of course, all of this is within a system that is really under pressure from not enough detectives doing the work to try and find and arrest the suspects, to the court systems, which are backed up and slowed down, inefficient and in some ways corrupt. Is this the beginning of sort of unlocking the backlog? Is this something that could really see a massive change, or are we still going to be hampered with those other problems?
I don't think that the government will ever allow this to happen again. I think it was so catastrophic at so many different levels, and it's taken them a lot of effort and a lot of flack, really, to pull themselves out of this. They're already building a state-of-the-art laboratory in the Eastern Cape, which is going to assist with capacity. And they've understood, in a country which has such a high sexual violence rate, that really there's no better evidence than DNA evidence. It's not the only evidence, but it's certainly one of the most powerful forms of evidence. So I don't foresee that this situation will occur in South Africa again. I certainly hope not, because they've understood the value of this technology and they've invested so much into the technology and into reducing the backlog. So let's hope going forward that this continues. And I certainly think that with the reinstatement of the convicted offender bill, which is now made operational from the 3rd of March, which you mentioned at the beginning, I've heard that they've already advanced their orders, over 100,000 kits.
All right. Unfortunately, I was just going to find out a little bit more about that bill, but we do seem to have lost the line to Dr. Vanessa Lynch, Director at DNA for Africa. But really important, positive news that this DNA backlog is essentially cleared, and that is going to open the way to really track down particularly serial offenders.